Hey, welcome back. Dan Mason here on Friday morning at NewsTalk 780 KOH. Got some thoughts this morning. Email is danmason@kkoh.com. We have spent a fair amount of time already this week and the last several days talking about our upcoming Nevada primary election, primarily by mail. I've shared my concerns about this with you. But our former Nevada Attorney General and a co-chair of the Trump campaign here in Nevada, Adam Laxalt, is here, who shares many of my concerns and then some. Adam, great to catch up. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
So how much potential trouble are we in here?
Well, look, I think the president is right when he continues to sound the alarm for mail-in voting. I think it's important to distinguish absentee voting, which we've had and most states have, where a voter can specifically request a ballot by mail to vote. That's something we have a chain of custody on, and we know the exact voter that it's attached to. But what we're really worried about is this large mail-in ballot election, not only in Nevada, but across the country. And, the fact of the matter is that there is no other method of voting that is more ripe for fraud than mail-in voting. And this should make perfect sense. I think anybody that actually thinks about it for a second starts to really wonder, gosh, how in the world can you make sure that people are the right people sending back their ballots, making sure that there isn't coercion on the other side of whoever is filling out a mail-in ballot. And so, it's just very, very alarming that out of nowhere, let's just take Nevada, we'll try our first ever mail-in election this year. And yes, right now it's just for the primary. But, I'm certainly concerned it could be easily extended out to the general election.
That was a question I was going to ask you, what the likelihood of that might be, and I'm assuming we're going to hear more about that as time goes by. The stories we're hearing are truly frightening, because the issue here is what we describe as inactive voters, and there are many folks making the claim this week that I've seen. They just changed their address. We don't have to worry about that. That's not true, is it?
Well, look, those of us that care about voter fraud in general, it is very hard to get any oxygen because the media typically tries to downplay any talk of voter fraud. Mm-hmm. One break we had this go-round was this video that emerged of all these ballots piled around in apartment buildings and in trash cans. And once you see that video, it's pretty hard to ignore that there are, in fact, ballots that are strewn all along the valley in the greater Las Vegas area in Clark County. And so, how did this come about? That's the part that is just so astounding. So the Democrat groups nationally as well as locally that typically sue on these type issues, they fly into Nevada, they file a lawsuit after the Secretary of State converted us to a mail-in ballot election, and they say, well, we want this mail-in election to look like X. And they've got their giant wish list of things that they want to make the election look like the way they want it. Then what happens? Right before ballots are about to be mailed, only in Clark County, they settle with the other side. And I want to be careful about the language here. The lawsuit is still ongoing, which we can get to. But what they agreed to do was to pull the preliminary injunction request in exchange for mailing inactive voters, as well as limited ballot harvesting. And so what does that mean? It means that typically you would mail registered voters that are active on the rolls. And these are people that have voted in prior elections and that are responding to these multiple requests from registrars in the post office. These 200,000 inactive voters were pulled into inactive status for a reason, because the post office told the registrar, these people don't live here anymore. So just imagine for your listeners how astounding it is that they mailed 200,000 voters in Clark County. You know, we only have about 1 million people that vote in a peak election. So now we got an extra 200,000 voters that were mailed these ballots. And the registrar actually said, I don't want to send these out. We don't think people live there. We don't think this is very safe. But he was forced by the county commission to do it anyway. So that's why you get all these ballots laying around. That's why you have postal workers, longtime postal workers, actually going public and sounding the alarm. They've never seen so many ballots laying around. They've never seen so many ballots going to addresses where people no longer reside there.
Yeah, and I've always said, you know, voting is one of the most sacred rights that we have and one of the most important ones. And if you move, change your address, whatever changes, and you don't step up and update your voter information, that's on you, not anybody else, right?
Well, yeah, even if it's not on you, the response can't be, well, just mail it to the address anyway. Yeah. Right? I mean, that can't be the solution because, yes, someone could pick up that ballot and mail it back in. And so for today, there is a signature requirement. The Democrats are still suing to get that removed. And any day between now and June 9th, a judge could say, okay, we're not going to require signature requirements. So I want all the listeners to know that one control could easily disappear. We have plenty of activist judges that do not side with the rule of law on issues like this. But even if that stays in place, I just ask your listeners, does anyone think a signature requirement is enough? Truly? I don't remember signing when I registered to vote. I don't remember thinking carefully about my signature, making sure that I perfectly signed it because it's going to be used for validation, forever. And so this is supposed to be the only check. Do we think there's not a single person in a registrar's office that wouldn't just push through a ballot that the signature may not look like it? Do we not think that people can't forge signatures? And the Washington Post, shockingly, put out an op-ed just yesterday, or I should say a contributor published one on the Washington Post. And he pointed out that the bipartisan commission that President Carter was on said that mail-in balloting is one of the least safe methods of voting. And they specifically talk about something called granny farming. And, what is that? Well, if you're mailing thousands of ballots into senior homes and you're going to have hundreds of people that are, say, Democrat paid activists going in there and trying to potentially coerce a senior citizen into voting for someone that they're not aware of or they don't really want to vote for. And by the way, of course, Republicans could do the same thing.
Sure.
This is something we should worry about, is how many people could be taking advantage of. How many people on this call maybe are a 60-year-old father and they are getting 4 or 5 ballots in the mail, and maybe they're getting their 2 or 3 kids who are either at college or maybe haven't lived in the house for 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. 5 ballots.
I got several emails from listeners saying that very thing this week, that their kids have moved. One said one of their kids lives in Wyoming, and they got all 3 of them in the mail at the old address.
Okay, and we can assume, since those people that are emailing you are concerned, and they are not going to fill out their kids' ballots.
But they could.
But can we be sure that no parent is going to fill out these extra ballots for their kids? Or no wife is going to fill out a ballot for their husband? No, of course we can't be.
Yeah. My kid's an idiot, so I'm going to handle this for him, right?
Yeah, whatever. And so it's and the other thing that's going on is, the president tweeted out that he's concerned about voter fraud. And what does Twitter do? The very first fact check it's ever done, you click this little link that says, click here. Fact check. And when you click it, it cites the Washington Post and CNN for the first thing you see is this is unsubstantiated. The president's claims are unsubstantiated. So they act like it's verifiably false.
Yeah.
When the reality is, of course, we have voter fraud. There's been convictions for all types of voter fraud all over the country. So they may think that it's not as severe as the president thinks or you and I think, but they can't say that it's false and basically countermand this. Yeah. But they did, and that's what we face.
Former Nevada Attorney General and co-chair of the Trump campaign in Nevada, Adam Laxalt. I got to ask you this before we run out of time. Ballot harvesting. It is the most insane thing I've ever heard, and why it's even part of this is beyond me. How dangerous is this third-party people having access to all this?
Okay, so today we don't have ballot harvesting in our state.
In
Clark County, as part of that thing I explained at the beginning, there is now this limited ballot harvesting going on. It's controlled by the county. It's kind of a bizarre deal. Democrats are suing still to make sure that there's wide-scale, I'll call it California-style ballot harvesting. We have thousands of people out there collecting ballots. I mean, do I need to even finish that thought? I mean, of course that is wildly dangerous, that these ballots could be collected and forged and mailed back in. But more significantly, I go back to the senior homes. I go back to any collections of voters where people maybe aren't that engaged or aren't that concerned about a given election. There is so much room for coercion. There's room for vote buying. We know famously in Las Vegas about the busing program, right? Busing people to polls, which is a pretty frustrating deal. Well, you wouldn't even need to worry about busing if you can just gather thousands of people in a room and say, here, check here, check here, check here, sign, mail in. And I don't think that is what we want as Nevadans.
I would think that most any person with common sense would say even the remote possibility of any of this being abused ought to be enough to say no, but we're not quite there yet. We're going to keep an eye on this for sure. Adam Laxalt, our former Nevada Attorney General, I appreciate you coming on and checking in with us on this morning.
Thanks, Dan.